Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're getting into something pretty intense. It's a document a listener sent over called Synthesis, a dystopian trajectory of Orwell in America.
Yeah, that title alone tells you it's not exactly light reading.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It maps out this fictional future, the Republic of Colombia, running from, 2025 to 2045.
That's right. And it's presented as a kind of warning, really. It draws these stark lines between Orwell's 1984 and, well, some currents we see today in the U.S.
Exactly. And what really hits home, I think, is how it starts. This Republic of Colombia. It begins with promises, order, restoration, things people often crave when times feel chaotic. But this document we're looking at, it tracks how that slides into this really specific kind of authoritarian control based on race, particularly around immigration. Who belongs, who doesn't?
Right. And for you listening, especially if you like getting to the heart of complex issues quickly, with those kind of aha moments, this dive should deliver. We're going to unpack this fictional path and look at those potential real-world echoes the author points out.
Okay, so let's dive into this fictional Republic of Colombia. What's the setup? What are the conditions that allow this to happen?
Well, the document describes a democracy that feels like it's coming apart at the seams. A lot of weariness, culture wars, fatigue, big economic gaps between people, and this deep, deep distrust of the media.
Yeah, you can see how that creates an opening.
Exactly. It makes people receptive, maybe even eager for a strong leader who promises to just cut through the noise and fix things.
Okay, but how does that desire for stability become so exclusionary, so focused on race?
That's the critical turn, according to the text. National identity gets redefined. But it's not about expanding who's included. It's about defining the nation by who is shut out. Non-white citizens are systematically framed as, well, not really belonging, as threats to the true national character.
And this isn't just talk, right? The document says this translates directly into policy.
So absolutely. Concrete actions. Under this idea of national restoration, Colombia sets up this dual-track immigration system. Yeah. So on one hand, really aggressive, rapid deportations of non-white people. But on the other hand, they actively recruit and welcome white Afrikaners. The regime calls them cultural allies.
Cultural allies. Wow, that's quite a phrase.
It's loaded, isn't it? So it's not just kicking people out, it's deliberately trying to engineer the population towards a specific racial profile.
And they justified this, huh?
The document says the regime sold it as necessary for demographic stability, and to cement that, they went after information itself, rewriting school textbooks, silencing libraries.
The Ministry of Truth, basically.
Pretty much. Controlling the past, controlling the narrative to match the state's ideology.
Okay, so with measures that drastic, surely there was pushback. Resistance.
The text mentions it, yeah. Early on, you see sparks, teachers refusing the new curriculum, some journalists trying to report honestly, a few local leaders resisting. But the document emphasizes how effective Colombia's surveillance state becomes very quickly. And maybe more chillingly, how public opinion, swayed by the propaganda, turns against the dissenters. They start seeing them as troublemakers, not truth tellers.
Right. That's how it works, isn't it? You isolate the critics, make them seem out of touch or dangerous.
Exactly. And it puts ordinary people in this awful position. Choose the perceived comfort and safety the regime offers, or choose the difficult, maybe dangerous path of truth.
A grim choice.
Yeah.
But the story in the document doesn't stop there with despair, does it? Something shifts.
It does. A new generation emerges, and they're described very differently. Multiracial, multilingual, and crucially, not afraid in the same way. These are the kids who grew up under this system.
The children of the silenced.
You could say that. And they don't just passively accept things, they fight back.
What does their resistance look like?
It's creative. It's diverse. They use art as protests. They use tech algorithms to get around censorship. They file lawsuits. They build community through empathy, what the document calls love, turning culture itself into resistance.
Turning grief into policy, fear into fire. I remember reading that line. Powerful.
It is. And in the fictional narrative, this resistance eventually leads to the fall of Colombia.
A hopeful note within the fiction.
Yes, but the author clearly intends it as a contract, a challenge to us now, not a guarantee for the future.
Which brings us right to that unsettling phrase in the document. The United States in 2025 as the prequel.
Yeah, that lands hard. The point isn't that the U.S. is Colombia. It's that the document argues we're standing at a similar kind of crossroads, seeing some similar warning signs.
Okay, let's unpack that. What specific parallels does the document draw between this fictional dystopia and the U.S. today?
Well, it points to several things. Politicians using language that echoes extremist views. Education becoming a battleground.
Yeah.
The debates over teaching history, banning books, this sort of cultural whitewashing.
Trying to create a cleaner, less complicated national story.
Exactly. And then there's the whole issue of information control.
How so?
The power to define what's true seems to be concentrating. You hear fake news constantly, which erodes trust in journalism. And then social media algorithms often trap us in echo chambers, reinforcing what we already believe instead of challenging us.
It's a disturbing list of parallels, but the document also says people are pushing back here now.
Definitely. It stresses that. Millions of people resisting these trends creatively, assertively, every day. It's not a lost cause, it's an ongoing struggle.
Now, the title mentions Orwell directly. How does 1984 fit into this analysis?
Orwell's book is like a handbook for dystopia, isn't it? It shows how control works through manipulating language, twisting identity, and fundamentally attacking the concept of objective truth. Doublethink, newspeak.
And the document connects this directly to these racially selective immigration policies. How does that link work?
Yeah, the argument presented is that these kinds of policies can lead down a dangerous path. First, they help build this myth of national identity based on racial purity.
Right.
Second, they can create a two-tiered society, different rules, different rights, different realities based on your race. And third, all of this helps build a more authoritarian state that needs to silence dissent, rewrite history, police thought, just to maintain that hierarchy.
So immigration stops being about borders and becomes about population control, social engineering.
That's the core argument in the text, yes. Using immigration as a tool to consolidate power by reshaping the nation's demographics along racial lines.
Okay, the document then does a side-by-side.
Yeah.
Colombia versus the U.S. in 2025. Let's walk through some key areas, starting with immigration policy itself.
Sure. So, Colombia. Mass deportation of non-whites, bringing in white Afrikaners. The U.S. parallel drawn in the text points to things like selective refugee policies, historical deportation patterns targeting Latinx communities, and bans or proposed bans on Muslim immigrants. The document suggests a potential underlying bias there.
Okay. What about surveillance? Always a big theme in dystopias.
Right. Colombia uses advanced AI tracking biometric loyalty programs. The U.S. comparison mentions the spread of facial recognition by police, social media surveillance, the constant battles over data privacy. Potential stepping stones, the document implies?
And controlling the past. Education.
Colombia literally rewrites the curriculum, sanitizes history. The U.S. parallel highlighted is the current fight over teaching things like critical race theory, the book bans in schools, that cultural whitewashing idea trying to erase uncomfortable parts of history.
What about civil society? The space for protest and organizing.
Colombia has state-backed militias, actively suppresses protest. The comparison points to the rise of armed private militias in the U.S., reports of voter intimidation, and laws being passed in some states to criminalize certain types of protest.
And information control. Defining truth.
Colombia has a total state media monopoly. The U.S. doesn't, obviously, but the document points to the falling trust in mainstream media, the fake news attacks, and how algorithms create those filter bubbles, potentially fragmenting everyone's sense of reality.
Lastly, citizenship itself. How is that treated?
In Colombia, it shifts towards being ancestry-based, and they actively disenfranchise non-white naturalized citizens. The U.S. parallels noted are the ongoing debates about birthright citizenship and the impact of voter ID laws, which the document argues disproportionately affect minorities.
It's quite the list. And the document's point isn't that we're there, but that these echoes are a warning sign we can't ignore.
Exactly. It's a warning. But it also emphasizes that this isn't inevitable. There are ways to resist this kind of drift on multiple levels.
Okay, so what are these levels of resistance within the U.S. context, according to the document? Starting small with individuals.
Individual actions matter, it says. Whistleblowers speaking out, teachers who refuse to teach sanitized history, everyday citizens protesting, organizing, telling their own stories to counter official narratives.
And then scaling up to communities.
Yeah, community and grassroots efforts. Things like sanctuary city movements, mutual aid networks helping people directly, local organizing, getting involved in school boards, town halls, real boots-on-the-ground stuff.
Institutions have a role too, right?
A huge one. A free press doing investigative work is crucial. Legal groups like the ACLU, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the SPLC, fighting discriminatory practices in court, universities protecting academic freedom and critical thought.
What about formal politics and lawmaking?
That's another key level. State governments can act as checks on federal power. electing leaders committed to civil rights and democracy, using lawsuits strategically to uphold rights.
And finally, what the document calls systemic resistance.
Yeah.
Sounds fundamental.
It is. It's about protecting the core democratic machinery, an independent judiciary, real checks and balances between branches of government, and absolutely vital electoral integrity, secure elections, fair districts, making sure everyone can vote.
The document also puts a spotlight on the current generation of non-white Americans. How are they characterized in these resistance efforts?
As particularly assertive. Politically, culturally, socially, you see high levels of civic engagement, especially around justice issues. They're incredibly skilled at using digital tools to mobilize quickly, often bypassing traditional media or power structures.
And culturally?
There's a real confidence described, a rejection of assimilation pressure, an embrace of diverse identities and histories, and building global connections, seeing their struggles as linked to human rights movements worldwide. The document says they're not just asking for a seat at the table, they're demanding the whole system be transformed.
Which leads to this idea of a threshold moment, a choice point.
Exactly. The document frames it starkly. One path is towards what it calls restorative democracy, inclusion, transparency, facing history honestly, renewing civic life. The other is towards a kind of neo-nationalist authoritarianism driven by fear, selective memory, excluding people based on identity, controlling truth.
And it's a choice facing everyone. Individuals, institutions, leaders.
Collective choice, yeah.
So, looking further down that darker path. If these racially selective immigration policies did become more entrenched, what are the potential long-term consequences the document explores socially?
Socially, it predicts a deepening of racial divides, a more rigid hierarchy, more polarization, more conflict between groups as inequality grows, and perhaps worst, the normalization of racial fear, where discrimination just becomes accepted as necessary.
Absolutely.
The risk is a shift towards actual ethno-nationalist government, where one group's interests are officially put first. More aggressive voter suppression, maybe even demographic engineering, basically the collapse of democratic norms.
And the military angle is quite alarming too.
Very. It suggests further militarization of the border and immigration enforcement, blurring lines between police and military. This could increase domestic instability, even raise the risk of insurgency. And deep racial divides in society could fracture the military itself, impacting morale, loyalty, everything.
To make this all concrete, the document lays out that detailed 4-phase timeline for the fictional Republic of Colombia 2025 to 2045. Let's quickly walk through that as an illustration. Phase 1.
Phase 1, 2025-2030, is purity and security. Mass deportations, welcoming the Afrikaners, militarizing IC and DHS, crushing protests, English-only laws prosecuting un-American behavior, very much like Orwell's thought crime concept taking root.
Okay, then Phase 2, 2030-2035.
Social engineering. Nationalizing education with a state-approved, mythologized history, ramping up surveillance with loyalty councils, forcibly relocating non-white communities, incentivizing white births, cutting services for non-compliant non-whites, controlling reality, like in 1984.
Phase 3, 2035-2040.
Political realignment. Biometric loyalty cards needed to vote. Disqualifying opposition candidates, stripping citizenship from naturalized non-whites, labeling dissenters as official subversive threats, basically rewriting the electorate and eliminating opposition.
And the final phase, 4, 2040-2045.
Militarized authoritarianism. Military and police merge into one force. Martial law. Deputized civilian militias. Labeling activists as terrorists. Military purges. International isolation met with intense nationalism. An underground resistance emerges. And the state completely defines truth. The full Orwellian nightmare built on racial hierarchy.
It's a terrifyingly logical progression, laid out like that. Even as fiction, it shows how step-by-step these kinds of policies could lead to, well, that.
Exactly. Colombia serves as that cautionary tale, showing how manipulating immigration and identity can dismantle democracy.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's just restate. The Republic of Colombia is fiction.
Absolutely fiction. But as we've discussed, the document argues its building blocks are pulled from real history, from Orwell's insights, and from policy debates happening right now.
And that final thought from the document really stays with you about truth.
Yeah. In 1984, Orwell warns that the most dangerous power is the ability to control truth. In the Republic of Colombia, truth became the property of the state. In the United States, truth still belongs to the people, but only if they fight to preserve it.
That's the core message, isn't it? Democracy isn't automatic. It needs work. Pushing back against these kinds of trends isn't radical. The document suggests it's responsible citizenship.
Couldn't agree more. So maybe the thought to leave you with is just that. As you encounter information, news, narratives every day, ask yourself those questions. Whose truth is this? Who benefits? Which voices are amplified? Which are missing? Your critical thinking, your engagement, it's the safeguard.